The 50 most famous artworks by Edgar Degas. Number 50. Dancer with a Bouquet, Curtsying. 1877. In the 19th century, the world of Parisian ballet became one of Edgar Degas' main artistic obsessions. Dancer with a Bouquet, Curtsying represents the painter's refined approach to movement, femininity, and the atmosphere of the period's theaters. In this work, a solitary dancer occupies the center of the composition, bowing gracefully while holding a bouquet of flowers, a symbol of the ephemeral glory of dance. The painting not only captures the beauty of the moment, but also hints at the effort behind the elegance, showing the fatigue hidden in the protagonist's subtle gestures. Degas, with his particular interest in artificial lighting, bathes the scene in warm, soft tones, striking a balance between the delicacy and intensity of the setting. The use of color and pastel, characteristic of Degas in his artistic maturity, are key in this work. The fluidity of the strokes, combined with the precise diffusion of the pigments, gives a vibrant texture that evokes the dynamism of the show. Unlike other paintings that portray life behind the scenes, in this scene the dancer is alone in her moment of recognition. Her posture, despite the reverence, does not denote overflowing happiness, but rather a kind of latent melancholy. The composition, with its diagonal marked by the dancer's inclination, creates a sensation of movement stopped in time, an effect that Degas mastered with mastery. This work is a reflection of Degas' deep interest in ballet and its world, in which he found not only a source of visual inspiration, but also a metaphor for artistic discipline and dedication. Throughout his career, Degas tirelessly explored the representation of the body in movement, moving away from the rigid and static compositions of the academic tradition. In Dancer with a Bouquet, Curtsying, his artistic evolution is evident, displaying a technical mastery that goes beyond anatomical precision and delves into emotional expression. Degas' fascination with ballet not only allowed him to experiment with innovative techniques, but also gave him a privileged place in art history as the great chronicler of dance. Curiously, despite his deep knowledge of the world of ballet, Degas was never a mere passive spectator. On numerous occasions, he infiltrated rehearsals to closely study the dancers' gestures and postures, making them eternal protagonists of his art. Number 49. Scene from the Steeplechase, The Fallen Rider. 1866. In the 19th century, equestrian painting had exponents who elevated it beyond the simple portrait of horses and riders. Edgar Degas, although recognized for his fascination with ballet, also found in horse racing an inexhaustible source of study of movement and dramatic tension. Scene from the Steeplechase, The Fallen Rider is one of his most striking works in this genre, capturing an instant of chaos and vulnerability in an event of speed and precision. In the painting, a horse stands defiantly in the foreground, while its rider lies on the ground, victim of a stumble or a bad maneuver. The scene unfolds with a drama unusual in Degas' production, who here does not portray triumph or glory, but the danger inherent in the competition. The work is notable for its dynamic composition, where the figures are not aligned with a rigid structure, but rather seem to move in different directions. Degas uses an almost photographic visual approach, with a low perspective that intensifies the feeling of instability. The brushwork is agile and loose, allowing the viewer to feel the immediacy of the event. In terms of color, the dark, earthy tones contrast with the white of the fallen rider's clothing, drawing the eye to the central point of tension. Degas demonstrates his ability to convey the energy of the moment without the need for minute details, relying on the expressiveness of the stroke and the arrangement of the elements. Unlike other traditional equestrian depictions, where the majesty of the horse is the main focus, Degas introduces a more raw and realistic view of the competition. The work reminds us that in the world of racing, defeat is as much a part of the spectacle as victory. In this sense, Degas moves away from romantic idealism to offer a representation closer to reality. His treatment of the subject anticipates certain approaches that would later be seen in sports photography, where the capture of a fleeting moment becomes the core of the image. Degas' fondness for horse racing was no coincidence. In his youth, he meticulously studied equine anatomy, making numerous sketches and preparatory studies. His fascination with movement led him to observe both the elegance of bodies in dance and the power of horses in full race. Paradoxically, despite his constant exploration of dynamism, Degas suffered from vision problems that, over the years, forced him to change his pictorial approach. However, his ability to capture the essence of movement never faded. Number 48. Portrait of Mademoiselle Fiocre in the ballet La Source. From 1867 to 1868. In the 19th century, opera and ballet became the great spectacles of the European aristocracy. In this context, Edgar Degas found an ideal space to explore his pictorial talent, creating works that combined the precision of portraiture with the atmosphere of the theatrical scene. Portrait of Mademoiselle Fiocre in the ballet La Source is one of his most outstanding pieces in this field, where the famous dancer Eugénie Fiocre is portrayed in a moment of introspection, far from the frenzy of the stage. The work, more than a simple portrait, is a meditation on pause and serenity in the world of ballet, a universe that Degas knew how to represent with unparalleled mastery. The composition breaks with the conventions of traditional portraiture, as the figure of Emile Fiocre is not presented in a frontal or grandiose pose, but in a moment of reflection. Her relaxed posture and the picturesque surroundings suggest a contrast with the intensity of the spectacle for which she is preparing. Degas, faithful to his style, uses a delicate color palette with pastel tones that emphasize the softness of the scene. The texture of the tutu, the folds of the fabrics, and the handling of light confirm his technical skill, which is evident in every detail of the composition. This work is a testament to Degas' interest in the less visible side of ballet, the one that occurs between acts and out of the spotlight. While other artists focused on the grandeur of the spectacle, he explored the moments of calm, the lost glances, and the hidden thoughts of the dancers. In this sense, his painting becomes a visual chronicle of the lives of the performers, with a psychological depth that few artists have managed to capture with such sensitivity. Although Degas is renowned for his ability to capture movement, in this work he demonstrates that his talent went far beyond simply depicting the body in action. Through stillness, he manages to convey the essence of his subject, turning a fleeting moment into an eternal image. In his obsession with capturing the truth behind dance, Degas became the keenest observer of ballet of his time, immortalizing on his canvases what spectators rarely got to see. Number 47. Combing the Hair, La Coiffure. 1896. At the end of the 19th century, in a period when the exploration of female intimacy was taking on a new tone in European painting, Edgar Degas presented Combing the Hair, La Coiffure. This work is a sublime example of his obsession with capturing femininity from a realistic perspective, eliminating any excessive idealization that dominated the representation of women in previous centuries. The scene, in its apparent everydayness, reveals the artist's mastery in the use of light and color. A woman with her back turned, with her reddish hair being combed by another figure, is the protagonist of the composition. The distribution of warm colors, with touches of orange and red, gives the work a vibrant and at the same time calm character. Degas, influenced by Japanese art and the photography of his time, opted for an elevated perspective and an unexpected frame, which reinforces the feeling of immediacy. The pastel technique, one of Degas' favorites in his mature period, reaches its maximum expression here. With a rich and textured application, he manages to capture the softness of the skin, the shine of the hair, and the enveloping atmosphere of the scene. His energetic but controlled stroke shows a studied spontaneity, which highlights the intimacy of the moment without stripping it of its pictorial character. Despite the stillness of the instant depicted, the vibrant brushstrokes and color contrasts create a dynamic tension, typical of Impressionism, but with the psychological depth of the artist. Within Degas' career, this work represents a crucial point in his exploration of the female figure in her private life. Unlike his famous dancers, combing the hair is not intended as a spectacle or study of movement, but rather a portrait of female routine from an intimate and natural perspective. His preference for domestic scenes at this stage of his career reflects his withdrawal from public life and his interest in the introspective. This piece also illustrates how Degas gradually abandoned the use of oil paint in favor of pastel, a technique that allowed him greater freedom of expression. The impact of combing the hair on art history lies in its approach to the female figure from a perspective far removed from conventional eroticism. Its proximity to photography, its bold framing, and its focus on texture and color make it a reference for later movements, such as Expressionism and modern art. Although Degas never considered himself an Impressionist in the strict sense, his influence on the evolution of 20th century art is undeniable. It is remarkable how, in a simple scene of personal grooming, he managed to capture the essence of his time and transcend it with a timeless sensibility. Number 46. Young Spartans Exercising. 1860. In the 19th century, when historical painting still had a great influence in the Academy, Edgar Degas surprised us with Young Spartans Exercising, a work that moves away from his best-known scenes to delve into antiquity. The painting, which dates from his early years as an artist, shows his interest in history and his early mastery of drawing and composition. In the scene, a group of young Spartans train outdoors, surrounded by a vast landscape and bathed in a golden light. The work is not only an exercise in historical representation, but a modern reinterpretation of the classical ideals of strength, beauty, and discipline. Technically, the painting demonstrates the influence of the great masters Degas studied in his formative years, particularly Ingres and the Italian Renaissance artists. His handling of draftsmanship is impeccable, with precisely delineated figures and poses that suggest both dynamism and balance. However, unlike the rigid academicism of the period, Degas introduces a more fluid composition, with interactions between the characters that suggest implicit narratives. The color palette, with warm, earthy tones, evokes the atmosphere of the Mediterranean, but with a light that anticipates his evolution towards looser, more expressive techniques. This work is a rarity in Degas' output, as he later almost completely abandoned historical painting to focus on modern life. However, it already shows his interest in the human body in motion, a theme he would develop extensively in his famous depictions of dancers. It also shows his penchant for complex composition, with figures intertwined in a three-dimensional space that suggests depth without the need for excessive architectural detail. Beyond its artistic value, Young Spartans Exercising is a testament to Degas' versatility and his ability to masterfully approach different genres. Although it is not one of his best-known pieces, it is essential to understanding his evolution as an artist. Curiously, despite its precision in anatomy and composition, the work also has an almost theatrical quality, as if the characters were acting rather than experiencing the scene. This duality between what is represented and what is perceived would be a constant in his later work, consolidating him as one of the most innovative painters of his time. Number 45. Dancer and Lady with Fan, 1885. In the mid-19th century, when the Paris Opera House was the epicenter of French cultural life, Edgar Degas found in ballerinas an inexhaustible source of inspiration. Ballerina and Lady with a Fan exemplifies his fascination with the world of ballet and his desire to capture both the grace of the performers and the atmosphere of Parisian theaters. In this work, the composition is divided between two contrasting figures: a young ballerina, in full preparation, and an elegant lady with a fan who observes her. The tension between the two women suggests a social and generational difference, which enriches the scene with an implicit narrative. The use of pastel in this work is masterful, with overlapping layers of color creating a vibrant texture. The ballerina, dressed in her signature tutu, is depicted with loose brushstrokes that suggest movement, while the lady with a fan, in a more static pose, is more precisely outlined. Degas strikes a balance between the spontaneous and the structured, capturing the ephemeral essence of dance without losing the solidity of the composition. The unusual perspective and fragmented framing reveal his debt to photography and Japanese printmaking, two fundamental influences on his work. In the context of his career, this painting reflects his interest in the contrasts between youth and maturity, effort and leisure, spectacle and contemplation. His dancers are never mere decorative figures. In them, Degas studies the discipline of the body and the hardship of training, moving away from the romantic vision of ballet that predominated in his time. Dancer and Lady with a Fan is a testament to his ability to endow seemingly trivial scenes with psychological depth. The impact of this work lies in its ability to capture a fleeting moment with an intensity that makes it eternal. In the apparent simplicity of the scene, Degas encloses a whole world of contrasts and emotions, consolidating his legacy as the great visual chronicler of modern life in 19th century Paris. Number 44. Dancers at the Bar, 1900. In the artistic context of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Edgar Degas established himself as one of the most innovative figures within Impressionism, although he always kept his distance from the labels imposed by the movement. Dancers at the Bar was created in 1900 AD and is one of his last works dedicated to the world of ballet, a recurring theme in his production. At this stage of his career, Degas was already suffering from considerable deterioration in his vision, which influenced the execution of the painting, where the contours become more diffuse and the colors acquire an intense expressiveness. The painting captures two dancers practicing at the bar in an intimate moment of absolute concentration. Unlike his previous works, in which the lighting was more natural and the details more precise, here a looser, almost abstract stroke is perceived, anticipating the trends of modern art. Technically, this work features bolder brushwork and a dense texture, the result of the use of pastels on paper mounted on cardboard. Degas, a master in the representation of movement, achieves here a sense of energy contained in the posture of the dancers, who seem frozen in a moment of effort. The use of warm and vibrant colors, with a predominance of ochres and oranges, generates an enveloping atmosphere, while the blurred backgrounds give depth without detracting from the figures. His skill in capturing light and female anatomy reaches a climax in this painting, demonstrating his ability to convey the essence of ballet with a unique and personal look. Within Degas' career, this work represents an evolution in his treatment of the subject of ballet, moving away from the initial precision to a more emotional and subjective representation. His exploration with pastel and his tendency to blur the boundaries between body and space demonstrate an artistic maturity that influenced later generations. Although Degas always rejected the idea of being an impressionist in the strict sense, his work anticipated many of the concerns that would define 20th century art. Dancers at the Bar synthesizes his interest in the body in movement and his obsession with composition, consolidating him as a master in the representation of the human figure. One of the most intriguing aspects of this work is its almost unfinished character, a trait that Degas increasingly adopted in his later years. Far from being an oversight, this quality lends a sense of immediacy and realism, as if the viewer were spying on a private moment within the dance studio. This fascination with the ephemeral and the everyday became one of his most distinctive trademarks, allowing him to capture the essence of modern life with unparalleled sensitivity. Number 43. Three Dancers on the Wings. From 1880 to 1885. In 19th century France, the rise of opera and ballet established these stages as spaces of glamour and artistic demand. Edgar Degas, always drawn to the everyday world of show business, dedicated much of his work to depicting dancers in intimate situations, far removed from romantic idealization. Three Dancers on Wings, painted between 1880 and 1885 AD, is a masterful example of this approach. Instead of showing them in full stage performance, Degas places them in a moment of waiting backstage, with relaxed postures and expressions of concentration. The composition, apparently casual, reveals a millimetric precision in the arrangement of the figures, creating a visual rhythm that reinforces the feeling of expectation. Degas' technical mastery in this work is undeniable. Using pastels on paper, he develops an atmosphere full of warm tones and soft shadows that envelop the dancers in an aura of mystery. The lighting comes from a point outside the scene, generating contrasts that enhance the three-dimensionality of the bodies. His stroke is agile but controlled, capturing the fleeting nature of the moment with almost photographic precision. The choice of the point of view, slightly elevated and diagonal, gives dynamism to the composition, guiding the viewer's gaze through the subtle gestures of the figures. Within Degas' artistic evolution, this work marks a midpoint between his first detailed studies and the expressive ease that would characterize his later works. His fascination with ballet was not limited to the aesthetics of dance, but also explored the physical effort and hidden discipline behind the spectacle. In this sense, Three Dancers on Wings is a testimony to his interest in revealing the reality behind scenic perfection, showing the dancers in their most human and vulnerable facet. Its influence on modern painting is undeniable, anticipating the use of the fragmented frame that would become a key resource in 20th century art. A particularly interesting detail in this work is the sense of movement latent in each figure. Although they appear static, the arrangement of the bodies and the inclination of the heads suggest an ephemeral moment, almost as if they are about to enter the scene. This mastery of the representation of immanence is one of the reasons why Degas is still considered one of the great observers of modern life. Number 42. After Bathing, Woman Drying Herself. From 1890 to 1895. In the late 19th century, Edgar Degas delved deeper into the representation of the female figure from an intimate and everyday perspective. After the Bath, Woman Drying Herself, created between 1890 and 1895 AD, is an outstanding example of this exploration. Unlike his works focused on ballet, where elegance and discipline predominated, here Degas immerses himself in the naturalness of private life. The woman portrayed is not aware of the viewer's gaze, which provides a sense of spontaneity and realism. This series of nudes, which at the time were controversial for their lack of idealization, became one of the artist's most innovative contributions. The technique used in this work reflects Degas' evolution towards a freer and more expressive stroke. Using pastels and charcoal on paper, he achieves an enveloping texture that accentuates the softness of the skin. The soft and diffuse lighting creates an intimate atmosphere, in which the female body seems to merge with the background in a subtle play of light and shadow. The composition, apparently simple, demonstrates a deep study of balance and anatomy, characteristics that distinguish Degas as a master of drawing. In the context of his career, this work marks a break with the classical canons of the representation of the nude. Instead of idealized figures and studied poses, Degas presents women in an everyday, artless act. This approach influenced later artists, such as the Impressionists and Fauves, who found in his work a source of inspiration for experimentation with form and color. One of the most striking aspects of this work is the absence of detail on the woman's face, a deliberate device that reinforces the feeling of anonymity and universality. Degas does not seek to portray a particular individual, but rather to capture the essence of an instant, turning the everyday into art with incomparable mastery. Number 41. Woman Ironing. 1869. At the end of the 19th century, the rise of the Industrial Revolution was radically transforming everyday life in France. In this context, Edgar Degas moved away from the traditional themes of academic painting to focus on scenes of modern life, reflecting with almost documentary precision the routine of the working classes. Woman Ironing, painted in 1869, captures a moment of effort and mechanical repetition within the female working world. Through an apparently simple composition, Degas manages to evoke a feeling of monotony and exhaustion, giving prominence to an anonymous worker in the middle of the action. The loose brushwork and use of earthy colors give the work an intimate and naturalistic atmosphere. The figure of the woman, leaning forward with the iron in her hand, seems to sink into her task with a gesture that denotes fatigue, while the light, filtering in from an invisible point, subtly shapes the volumes of her figure and the general environment. Degas avoids any idealization, showing the crudeness of a repetitive job that was common among women of his time. His mastery in the representation of movement, one of the hallmarks of his work, is evident in the posture of the figure, which transmits the contained energy of domestic work. This painting is an early example of the artist's interest in depicting everyday life with an almost ethnographic gaze. Unlike his Impressionist contemporaries, Degas moves away from the landscape and the changing light to focus on human gestures and the structural composition of space. His brushwork, although free, does not abandon the solidity of the drawing, which gives it an unmistakable character within the Impressionist movement. In Woman Ironing, the economy of detail and the sobriety of the chromatic palette reinforce the message of simplicity and hardness of domestic work, anticipating many of the explorations he would undertake in later works. Curiously, this theme was recurrent in his artistic production, as in later years Degas created several versions of women engaged in domestic work, thus consolidating his interest in portraying the less glorified aspects of Parisian life. The combination of his profound sense of realism with a carefully balanced composition make this work a visual testimony of the era and of the painter's unique sensitivity to capture modern life without embellishment or artifice. Number 40. Rehearsal Room at the Opera. 1872. In late 19th century Paris, opera was not only an elite spectacle, but also a microcosm where the aspirations, effort, and discipline of countless ballerinas dreaming of success were intertwined. Edgar Degas, fascinated by this world of precise movements and ethereal figures, made dance one of his favorite subjects. Rehearsal Room at the Opera, painted in 1872, is one of his first forays into this universe, capturing the atmosphere of a ballet class with a composition that reveals both the grace and the demands of training. Unlike the static portraits of traditional painting, this work delves into the spontaneity of rehearsal. Degas employs a dynamic perspective with a slightly tilted point of view that accentuates the sense of depth in the room. In the foreground, some dancers rest or adjust their positions, while in the background, others continue practicing under the watchful eye of the ballet master. The scene is not an idealized representation of the art of dance, but a close observation of the effort and repetition inherent in the learning process. One of the most distinctive elements of this work is the masterful use of light and color. Degas plays with reflections on the wooden floor and with the dispersion of natural light entering from a large window outside the frame. The pastel tones, characteristic of many of his paintings of dancers, are combined with darker touches that add depth and structure to the composition. His technique, a combination of oil and pastel, provides a rich texture that reinforces the atmosphere of the scene. This work marked the beginning of a series of explorations of dance that would accompany him throughout the rest of his career. Degas not only documented the elegance of ballet, but also the reality of work behind the scenes, highlighting the rigor and discipline required of dancers. His fascination with rehearsals and spontaneous poses led him to capture moments that seemed taken from life itself, achieving a balance between realism and artistic composition. In this work, the viewer becomes a silent observer, a witness to the rigorous preparation that precedes the magic of the stage. Number 39. Dancers in Pink. From 1885 to 1890. In the late 19th century, Edgar Degas consolidated his interest in the world of ballet with a series of paintings that explored the relationship between movement, light, and form. Dancers in Pink, created between 1885 and 1890, is one of his most emblematic works within this genre. In it, the artist captures an ephemeral moment before the performance, where several dancers dressed in pink tutus prepare to go on stage. Degas does not focus on the grandeur of the spectacle, but on the intimacy of the moment before, where gestures and postures speak of the concentration and tension of the moment. The use of color in this painting is one of its most striking features. Degas combines different shades of pink with subtle gradations of light and shadow, achieving a vibrant yet delicate atmosphere. Unlike his earlier works, here the brushwork becomes looser, almost ethereal, anticipating the artist's interest in experimentation with pastel and other techniques. The composition, seemingly casual, is carefully balanced. The figures are grouped organically, creating a visual rhythm that guides the viewer's gaze through the scene. Degas' focus on rehearsals and the preparation of dancers rather than their performances was revolutionary in its time. By moving away from formal performances and the grand stage, he managed to capture the essence of effort and dedication behind dance. Dancers in Pink is a testament to his ability to capture the fleeting moment, the sense of movement frozen in time. The combination of his mastery of drawing with a freer and more expressive application of color demonstrates his artistic evolution in the later years of his career. This work also reflects the influence of photography and Japanese art on his work. The asymmetrical arrangement of the figures and the unusual framing are reminiscent of Japanese prints, which Degas collected and admired. His exploration of light, posture, and spontaneity here becomes a synthesis of his mature vision of art, where ballet is both a subject and a pretext for exploring beauty in the everyday. Number 38. Seated Dancer Rubbing Her Leg. 1878. At the end of the 19th century, At a time when art was beginning to move away from rigid academic canons and explore new ways of capturing everyday life, Edgar Degas immortalized the essence of ballet with a series of works that showed dancers in moments of great intimacy. Seated Dancer Rubbing Her Leg, created in 1878, is one of the most representative pieces of this facet of his artistic production. Unlike other representations of ballet in which the scenic splendor dominates the composition, here the artist opts for an introspective and personal look, moving away from the classical idealization of the stage and delving into the daily physical effort that dance demands. The dancer, captured in a moment of rest and relief after an exhausting practice, shows the most human side of the discipline, a vision that Degas constantly explored in his work. Technically, this painting stands out for its use of pastel on paper, a characteristic choice of the artist's later years. The application of color is vibrant but delicate, with a texture that conveys the softness of skin and the lightness of fabric. Degas, obsessed with movement and anatomy, achieves a naturalistic pose that seems drawn from direct observation. His loose and spontaneous strokes suggest the dancer's fatigue without the need for exaggerated artifice. The play of light and shadow reinforces the three-dimensionality of the figure, making the body stand out with subtle drama. This work, more than a simple representation, is a study of fatigue, effort, and dedication, elements that were an intrinsic part of the ballet universe and that Degas knew how to capture masterfully. Within Degas' career, Seated Dancer Rubbing Her Leg falls into a series of works where the artist explored the world of ballet from unusual angles. His interest in life behind the scenes led him to move away from conventional composition and capture intimate moments of the dancers, far from the grandiloquence of the spectacle. This documentary approach sets him apart from other painters of his time and reinforces his position as a keen observer of reality. Instead of portraying his models in perfect poses and framed in romantic idealization, Degas immersed himself in the rawness of his craft, showing the grueling discipline that lies beneath the beauty of ballet. It is interesting to note that, despite his affiliation with the Impressionists, Degas never considered himself part of the movement. His technique and interest in drawing kept him in an intermediate position between the academic tradition and emerging modernity. This work, in particular, reflects his ability to capture the essence of an instant without losing the formal rigor that characterized his entire production. Through this simple but powerful scene, the artist leaves us a tangible example of his obsession with movement and the truth behind the art of dance. Number 37. Ballet Class. 1871. In the middle of the 19th century, in a Parisian society where the Opéra Garnier was established as the epicenter of cultural refinement, Edgar Degas found in ballet a recurring motif for his artistic explorations. Ballet Class, a work created in 1871, transports us to one of the most intimate and representative settings of his work, the rehearsal room. Unlike the majestic theatrical scenes, this painting places us in a previous moment where the young dancers are preparing under the watchful eye of the dance master. The composition, apparently spontaneous, is charged with a realism that makes us part of the scene, as if we were witnesses of an everyday moment in the training of these artists. Degas' technical mastery is evident in the arrangement of space and the interaction between the characters. Perspective plays a crucial role, with a diagonal layout guiding the viewer's gaze across the room. The dancers appear in various poses, some adjusting their postures while others take a breath. The figure of the instructor, stern and focused, becomes the axis of the composition, reinforcing the idea of discipline and rigor that characterized the training of dancers at that time. The dim lighting and soft colors contribute to the feeling of serenity and shared effort, a duality that Degas masterfully handled in his works. Within Degas' oeuvre, ballet class is one of his first approaches to the theme of rehearsal and practice in ballet. From this work onwards, his obsession with capturing the dancer's efforts intensified, leading him to create countless studies in which he explored movement, light and body expression with an extraordinary level of detail. His classical training and his interest in photography influenced the composition of this scene, where the instantaneousness seems frozen in a carefully calculated frame. Although in his time ballet was synonymous with grace and beauty, Degas shows us its other side, that of dedication and hard work. Through this work, he leaves us an invaluable testimony of the world behind the stage, where the future stars of ballet were forged day after day under the demanding gaze of their teachers. Number 36. Four Dancers, 1899. Towards the end of the 19th century, Edgar Degas was in a phase of experimentation that led him to increasingly explore the use of color and composition in his paintings. Four Dancers, painted in 1899, represents a synthesis of his artistic evolution and his particular understanding of the movement and grace of ballet. Unlike his earlier works, where a more realistic perspective predominated, here the artist adopted a more abstract and dynamic approach, focusing on the fluidity of forms and the interaction of bodies in space. The arrangement of the dancers suggests a developing choreography, in which gestures and postures seem to flow naturally within the canvas. One of the most notable aspects of this work is the masterful use of color. Degas employs a vibrant palette of warm and cool tones that intertwine to create an ethereal atmosphere. The pastel technique, applied in delicate, diffuse layers, allows the lightness of the tutus and the skin of the dancers to be captured with a sense of immediacy and softness. Unlike his earlier paintings, here the line loses its rigidity in favor of a looser, more spontaneous composition, where light and color play a fundamental role in defining the forms. Four Dancers is one of Degas' last major works before his vision problems limited his ability to work with the same detail as in his earlier years. However, his creative energy never waned, and this painting is evidence of his evolution towards a more expressive and free style. The grouping of the figures, almost fused together, reinforces the idea of unity and harmony in the ballet, turning the scene into a visual play of shapes and colors that transcends conventional realism. Degas, rather than portraying dancers, created atmospheres where the spectator could almost hear the rustling of tutus and the murmur of the dance in motion. In this work, his genius lies in the ability to capture the ephemeral, that fleeting moment where art and reality merge in a single image. Number 35. Woman Combing Her Hair, from 1887 to 1890. In the artistic context of the 19th century, the work Woman Combing Her Hair is part of Edgar Degas' ongoing exploration of female intimacy and everyday gestures. This painting, produced between 1887 and 1890 AD, belongs to one of the artist's last creative stages, when his style evolved towards a freer and more expressive brushstroke. In those years, Parisian society was undergoing an accelerated transformation due to industrialization, and Impressionism, with its emphasis on capturing the moment, dominated the art scene. However, Degas, always on the margins of the movement, continued to explore the human figure from a more structured and analytical perspective. In this work, a woman is seen in the act of arranging her hair, a recurring theme in his work, but treated here with a particular sensitivity that distances it from conventional representations. Technically, Woman Combing Her Hair stands out for its carefully balanced composition. Degas avoids frontality and opts for an unusual perspective, capturing the protagonist from an unexpected angle. The brushwork becomes looser and more vibrant, with a palette of warm colors that reinforce the atmosphere of intimacy. At this stage of his career, Degas experimented with the use of pastel, a medium that allowed him to superimpose layers of color and give the skin of his figures a velvety texture. The light, diffused and enveloping, emphasizes the three-dimensionality of the body and highlights the softness of the hair in motion. This work is part of his exploration of the female figure, where the representation of women is not idealized, but shown in their everyday life with surprising naturalness. Throughout his career, Degas was distinguished by his interest in capturing movement and modern life, but in this painting there is a more introspective tone. While his scenes of dancers and horses are often full of dynamism, in Woman Combing Her Hair the emphasis is on stillness and the repetition of a common gesture. This approach suggests a fascination with the mechanics of the body and daily routine, moving away from any obvious narrative intention. The influence of Japanese prints, which Degas deeply admired, is perceptible in the asymmetrical arrangement of the figure and in the apparent spontaneity of the composition. His gaze is neither intrusive nor romantic, but almost scientific, interested in form, light, and color as essential elements of representation. One of the particularities of this work is its ability to convey a sense of intimacy without resorting to explicit details. Despite the apparent simplicity of the subject, the technical complexity and psychological depth make this painting a testament to Degas' genius in observing everyday life. In the years following its creation, the artist would continue to explore this same theme with variations in posture and in the treatment of color, demonstrating his obsession with precision and perfection of gesture. Number 34. Russian, Ukrainian dancers. 1899. In the late 19th century, Edgar Degas took his fascination with dance and movement to the extreme, creating uniquely expressive works such as Russian, Ukrainian dancers in 1899 AD. At this stage in his career, the artist, who suffered from increasingly severe vision problems, began to develop a more abstract and gestural style. Despite his physical decline, his interest in capturing the essence of the body in movement did not diminish but rather intensified. Paris in those years was a cultural hotbed in which ballet played a central role in artistic and social life. However, in this work, Degas departs from the elegant world of the Paris opera to depict a group of Eastern European, specifically Ukrainian, dancers whose folk dances had a more energetic and spontaneous character than classical choreographies. The technique employed in Russian, Ukrainian dancers displays an absolute mastery of color and stroke. Degas uses vibrant pastels to capture the dynamism of the figures in full motion. The orange, blue, and green hues seem to merge, creating a visual vibrating effect that evokes the speed and fluidity of dance. Unlike his earlier depictions of dancers, where structure and detail predominated, here the artist focuses on the overall impression of the moment, sacrificing anatomical precision in favor of a more visceral feel. The arrangement of the figures, slightly tilted and on different planes, reinforces the sense of rhythm and dynamism. Within Degas' career, this work is particularly significant because it marks a transition towards an almost expressionist approach. Although he never considered himself part of the modernist avant-garde, his experimentation with form and color places him as a precursor of the trends that would dominate the 20th century. Unlike his earlier, more restrained and balanced compositions, here there is greater freedom in the application of color, with thick brushstrokes and diffuse contours that suggest movement rather than define it. This change in approach reflects not only the evolution of his technique, but also his relentless search to capture the essence of human gesture. What makes Russian, Ukrainian dancers special is its ability to convey the energy and vitality of dance without resorting to minute detail. Degas, despite his deteriorating eyesight, achieved a masterful synthesis of form and emotion at this stage of his career. His fascination with movement led him to experiment with new techniques and materials, cementing his place as one of the great innovators of modern art. Number 33. Coming out of the bath. 1896. In 1896 AD, Edgar Degas created Coming Out of the Bath, one of his most representative works within his series of female nudes. In this painting, the artist departs from the classical tradition of the idealized nude to show the woman in an intimate and everyday moment. In the context of the 19th century, this representation was innovative and provocative, because instead of posing for the viewer, the female figure is captured in a spontaneous gesture, unconcerned with its own display. Paris, at that time, was the epicenter of a radical change in the arts, with the Impressionists challenging academic norms and paving the way for a more subjective and free painting. The composition of Coming Out of the Bath is notable for its use of color and light. Degas employs warm tones and loose brushwork to give the skin an almost tangible texture. The unusual, slightly elevated perspective creates a sense of intimacy and closeness. The influence of photography and Japanese printmaking is evident in the way the artist fragments the scene, focusing on a specific moment without concern for traditional symmetry. The woman, with her natural, artifice-free posture, embodies Degas' view of the human body as an object of study rather than idealization. The impact of this work on art history lies in its sincere approach to the subject of the nude. Unlike his contemporaries, who still resorted to mythological or allegorical representations, Degas shows reality without filters or unnecessary embellishments. This approach anticipates many of the explorations that 20th century artists would undertake in their search for a more authentic representation of the human body. Number 32. Blue Dancers. 1899. By the end of the 19th century, Edgar Degas had already consolidated his style within Impressionism, masterfully exploring dance as a recurring theme in his work. Ballerinas Azules is one of his most emblematic creations, where the artist's obsession with movement and light reaches an unprecedented level of maturity and refinement. In this painting, Degas captures a group of dancers in a moment of rest, enveloped in the subtlety of a chromatic palette dominated by blue tones. The work reflects not only the artist's fascination with ballet, but also his ability to capture the fleeting nature of the moment, a hallmark of his artistic production in the last years of his career. On a technical level, Degas' brushwork in this work is vibrant and fragmented, allowing him to build an enveloping atmosphere that reinforces the sense of movement on the canvas. The composition, seemingly spontaneous, is meticulously calculated. The figures are arranged at a diagonal angle that directs the viewer's gaze across the painting, a strategy that the painter employed on multiple occasions to give dynamism to his scenes. The use of pastel, a medium that Degas mastered with exceptional skill, allows him to play with the texture and transparency of color, creating an ethereal feeling that accentuates the delicacy of the figures depicted. This work is one of the artist's last major creations, produced when his vision was already considerably impaired. However, far from being a limitation, this circumstance led him to explore new visual approaches, focusing more on the perception of color and form than on minute details. Ballerinas Azules represents, in this sense, the culmination of a career dedicated to the exploration of the body in movement, where ballet is both an artistic motif and a pretext for studying the interaction of light and color in pictorial space. It is interesting to note that, despite the apparent stillness of the scene, the work conveys a sense of imminent movement, as if the dancers were about to rise and resume their dance. This effect, achieved through the distribution of color and the arrangement of the figures, reinforces the idea of ephemerality, a fundamental concept in Impressionism and, in particular, in the work of Degas. Number 31. Dancers climbing a staircase. From 1886 to 1890. In the later years of the 19th century, Edgar Degas continued his exploration of the world of ballet with a more experimental approach, focusing on the fragmentation of the body and the bold use of perspective. Dancers Climbing a Staircase is one of his most innovative compositions, in which the artist breaks with the conventional representation of the human figure and opts for an unusual frame, capturing the dancers in a moment of transition. The staircase is not only an architectural element, but a symbol of the physical effort and discipline that defines the life of the dancers, a recurring theme in Degas' work. The choice of viewpoint is key in this painting. Instead of a frontal scene, Degas offers us a perspective from above, almost as if the viewer were observing from a balcony. This tilted angle gives the work a sense of depth and dynamism, reinforced by the diagonal arrangement of the figures. The composition is carefully balanced, with negative space playing a fundamental role in the visual layout of the painting. Degas also employs a warm, earthy palette, which contrasts with the subtle color variations in the dancers' tutus, achieving a chromatic harmony characteristic of his mature output. The use of pastel in this work is particularly notable. Degas applies the pigment with a rough texture that mimics the quality of a quick sketch, but without losing precision in the depiction of bodies in motion. This approach allows him to capture the energy of the scene without resorting to sharp contours, a distinctive feature of his late style. The overlapping of strokes and the application of layers of color generate a sense of depth that intensifies the interaction between the figures and the environment, reinforcing the idea that painting is more of a fleeting impression than a static representation. One of the most fascinating aspects of this work is the way Degas emphasizes the relationship between art and physical effort. Unlike many of his earlier paintings, where the dancers appear on stage or in graceful positions, here he shows them in a more intimate, everyday moment, highlighting the demands behind artistic perfection. This more realistic and less idealized approach is a testament to Degas' evolution as an artist and his constant quest to capture the authenticity of human movement. Number 30. The Cotton Exchange in New Orleans. 1873. In the second half of the 19th century, Edgar Degas made a trip to the United States that would profoundly influence his work. During his stay in New Orleans, the city where part of his family lived, the artist had the opportunity to closely observe the commercial dynamics of the south of the country, which led him to create one of his most unusual paintings, The Cotton Exchange in New Orleans. This work, one of the few with a theme not related to dance or the female figure, depicts the interior of a cotton market, where several men are engaged in different tasks, from examining the merchandise to reading documents and discussing transactions. Unlike his ballet compositions, which are dominated by soft tones and diffuse light, in this painting Degas employs a more restrained palette, with a predominance of grays, ochres, and browns. The light, rather than being an enveloping element, is here used to highlight certain key details, such as the piled fabrics and the faces of the characters. The perspective is precise and detailed, reflecting the influence of academic painting that was still present in Degas' work at this stage. The spatial organization is reminiscent of a photographic snapshot, with the figures distributed in a seemingly random manner, but carefully calculated to create an effect of depth and realism. This painting is particularly relevant to the artist's career because it represents his only approach to genre art with a clear documentary intention. Through the representation of this commercial space, Degas offers a look at the economic reality of the time, reflecting the importance of cotton in the American economy of the 19th century. In addition, the work has a personal value, since the man sitting on the right, absorbed in reading a document, is René Degas, the artist's brother, who worked in the cotton business in New Orleans. While this work is a departure from Degas' most characteristic themes, its treatment of light, composition, and meticulous detail demonstrate the same mastery present in his depictions of ballet. What is most striking, however, is the sense of stillness and concentration that permeates the scene, a quality that contrasts with the energy of his paintings of ballerinas. In this sense, the Cotton Exchange in New Orleans is not only a unique piece within his oeuvre, but also one of the most intriguing for the way it captures a moment of everyday life with almost photographic precision. Number 29. Self-Portrait, 1855. In the 19th century, in a vibrant and changing Paris, Edgar Degas, young and ambitious, began to explore his artistic identity through the genre of self-portraiture. This work, painted in 1855 AD, reveals not only his technical skill from an early age, but also his introspection and search for identity. At a time when photography was beginning to gain ground, the pictorial self-portrait was still an essential exercise for artists, a way of measuring themselves against the masters of the past and establishing their own path. At just 21 years old, Degas shows a deep and serious gaze, framed by dark tones that evoke the legacy of the Renaissance tradition, especially Rembrandt and Ingres, whom he deeply admired. In this painting, we can already glimpse the traits that would define his career: mastery of drawing, dramatic use of light, and an almost psychological sensitivity to capture the essence of the subject. The self-portrait is not simply a physical representation of Degas, but a statement of intent. His controlled brushwork, subtle modeling of the face, and intensity of expression suggest a deep reflection on his own existence and his place in the art world. In contrast to his later works, where spontaneity of stroke and vibrant color would dominate the composition, here we perceive an academic rigor that is evidence of his classical training at the École des Beaux-Arts and his studies in Italy. The sober chromatic range and subdued lighting enhance the introspection of the young painter, lost in his thoughts, perhaps anticipating the evolution that his art would undergo in the years to come. This painting is a turning point in his career. Although Degas is best known for his ballet and horse racing scenes, this self-portrait is a testament to his early years and his deep connection to the portrait tradition. Over time, he would abandon classical canons to develop a more dynamic and experimental style, but this work allows us to glimpse a time when he was still struggling between academic rigidity and the need to innovate. The seriousness of his expression and the austere composition suggest that Degas understood early on that art was not merely entertainment, but a vocation that demanded total dedication. Interestingly, this would be one of the few self-portraits that Degas would make in his career. As his style evolved, his interest turned to the observation of society, human gestures, and the capture of movement. This painting, then, remains one of the few windows that allow us to see the artist from his own perspective, a young and reflective Degas who, unwittingly, was about to revolutionize modern art. Number 28. Racehorses, 1873. In the 19th century, Paris was a hotbed of modernity, where industrialization and social change were also reflected in the art world. In this context, Edgar Degas moved away from the historical and mythological themes that dominated academic painting to focus on scenes of contemporary life. Racehorses, painted in 1873 AD, is one of his most emblematic works within this exploration. In it, Degas masterfully captures a moment of tension before a horse race, a world that fascinated him and to which he would return constantly throughout his career. With his characteristic innovative approach, the artist does not limit himself to depicting the moment itself, but rather conveys the sense of immediacy and the energy contained in each stroke. What distinguishes this work is its asymmetrical composition and the way Degas plays with perspective. Inspired by photography and Japanese prints, he places the horses and riders at unexpected angles, creating a sense of depth and movement unusual for the time. The vibrant color palette and loose brushwork accentuate the liveliness of the scene, while the diffused light creates an almost ethereal atmosphere. Unlike other Impressionist painters, who tended to capture the fleeting nature of light across the landscape, Degas focused on the human figure and the action contained in each gesture. In this work, we can clearly see his interest in the posture of the riders and the natural elegance of the horses, elements that he would refine in his later series. The importance of racehorses lies in how it illustrates Degas' evolution within the Impressionist movement, even though he himself never considered himself part of it in the strict sense. Despite sharing with his contemporaries an interest in modernity and capturing the moment, his precise drawing technique and focus on composition set him apart from the rest. This work is, in a way, a testament to his ability to fuse the academic with the modern, achieving a perfect harmony between structure and spontaneity. The scene appears casual, as if the viewer had captured a random moment, but in reality every element is meticulously calculated. A fascinating detail about this work is that Degas depicted not only speed and dynamism, but also the pause before the explosion of movement. Unlike other equestrian paintings that focused on the climax of the race, here the interest is in the expectation, in the concentration of the riders, and in the containment of energy. This way of visually narrating a scene deeply influenced later generations of artists who sought to capture the pace of modern life. Number 27. The Singer in Green, 1884. In the 19th century, Paris's nightlife was a spectacle in itself. Cafes, theaters, and cabarets became stages where bohemianism and high society mingled in a frenzy of lights and music. Edgar Degas, always interested in capturing the essence of modernity, found in this environment an inexhaustible source of inspiration. The Singer in Green, painted in 1884 AD, is one of his most evocative works of this vibrant and ephemeral world. With a bold approach to composition and color, Degas immerses us in the atmosphere of a cafe concert, where the protagonist, illuminated by artificial light, seems trapped in the intensity of her performance. One of the most innovative aspects of this work is its unconventional framing, influenced by photography and Japanese art. The figure of the singer is slightly offset, which creates a feeling of spontaneity and closeness. The use of intense green, which dominates the scene, is not accidental. Degas experimented with chromatic contrasts to emphasize the lighting and texture of the painting. The loose and almost ethereal brushstrokes give it a particular dynamism, making the viewer feel the murmur of the audience and the vibration of the music in the air. Unlike other artists who idealized the female figure, Degas opted for a more realistic and direct representation. The singer is not an ethereal muse, but a woman in full performance, with an intense expression and a posture that suggests effort and dedication. This interest in the authentic, far from academic idealization, is one of the reasons why Degas is still considered a master of modernity. A fascinating fact is that Degas did not paint his scenes from life, but rather reconstructed them in his studio from sketches and memories. This technique allowed him to play with composition and colors more freely, achieving images that, although seemingly spontaneous, were carefully designed to convey a specific feeling. Number 26. Two Washerwomen, from 1876 to 1878. Edgar Degas, one of the main exponents of Impressionism, found in the daily life of the working class a recurring source of inspiration. Two Washerwomen is one of his most representative works in this sense, showing two women in full work in what appears to be a workshop or a washing bank. In the second half of the 19th century, the industrial boom transformed urban life, generating an endless number of activities linked to the production and maintenance of modern society. The washerwomen, women of humble condition who carried out arduous days in difficult conditions, were represented by Degas with a mixture of realism and empathy, providing the scene with an almost palpable energy. His loose and vibrant brushstrokes, characteristic of Impressionism, convey the sensation of movement and physical effort, while the dim lighting and earthy chromatic range enhance the atmosphere of wear and tear and labor. Technically, the work is notable for its unusual composition and treatment of light. Degas opted for a slightly elevated perspective, placing the figures in a diagonal arrangement that emphasizes the tension of their hunched bodies. The brushwork, though fragmented and dynamic, maintains a sufficient degree of definition to distinguish the folds of the clothing and the texture of the water on the garments. Unlike other Impressionists who preferred to work outdoors, Degas made numerous sketches and preliminary studies before giving final form to his works in the studio, which allowed him to perfect every detail of the composition. Within the artist's career, this work falls within a period in which Degas began to take a greater interest in the representation of human effort in specific professions, moving away somewhat from the world of high society that he usually portrayed in his early pieces. In parallel with his famous representations of dancers and jockeys, Two Washerwomen highlights his fascination with the body in action, capturing the tension of the muscles and the expression of fatigue on the women's faces. Its impact on art history is significant, as it reinforces the idea that Impressionist painting was not limited only to landscapes and scenes of bourgeois leisure, but also served as a window into the everyday reality of the working classes. Curiously, the depiction of manual labor in 19th-century art rarely attained the degree of detail and humanization that Degas achieved in this work. Unlike other painters who idealized or romanticized these scenes, Degas adopted a more realistic approach, showing the hard work without sentimentality. This links him to a painting tradition closer to Gustave Courbet and the Realists, although with the unique imprint of his Impressionist brushwork. Number 25. The Bellelli Sisters, Giovanna and Giuliana Bellelli. From 1858 to 1860. In the early years of his career, Edgar Degas moved away from the loose lines that would make him famous within Impressionism to develop a more classical and refined style. The Bellelli Sisters is one of the first examples of his mastery of portraiture, a genre that in the 19th century was still fundamental within academic painting. In this work, Degas portrays his cousins Giovanna and Giuliana Bellelli in a sober and elegant environment, characteristic of the European bourgeoisie of the time. The rigidity of the figures and the meticulously balanced composition reveal the influence of the old masters of the Renaissance, whom Degas studied with devotion during his travels to Italy. On a technical level, the work is distinguished by its use of restrained colors and the precision in the modeling of the figures. Every fold of the dress, every gesture, and every expression has been meticulously worked to convey the personality of the Bellelli sisters. The brushwork is more restrained and detailed than in his later works, reflecting the young Degas' attachment to the tradition of formal portraiture. However, even at this early stage, elements can be perceived that anticipate his mature style: the interest in the natural light that bathes the faces, the study of the psychology of the characters, and the subtle tension in the composition. This painting marks a key moment in Degas' artistic evolution. Although he still adhered to academic canons, His interest in capturing the inner life of his models gradually distanced him from official and conventional portraits. The expression of the Bellelli sisters, serene but introspective, suggests an emotional complexity that goes beyond the static and aristocratic pose that is common in this type of work. This sensitivity towards the character of his models will be a constant in his future representations of women, whether they are dancers, dressmakers, or workers. A curious detail is that this painting is part of a series of family portraits that Degas made during his stay in Italy, when he was just beginning to define his style. Despite its apparent formality, the painting conveys a subtle feeling of melancholy, possibly reflecting the Bellelli family context, which in those years was going through internal tensions. Degas, with his keen observation, was able to capture this atmosphere of emotional restraint with a mastery that few artists of his generation possessed. Number 24. Horses in the Prado, 1871. Edgar Degas' fascination with the equestrian world is evident in numerous works throughout his career. Horses in the Meadow is a magnificent example of his ability to capture the energy and elegance of these animals in a natural setting. In the 19th century, horse racing was one of the most popular forms of entertainment among the European aristocracy and bourgeoisie, and Degas found in it a subject rich in dynamism and compositional possibilities. The work, created in 1871, shows several horses in a wide meadow, probably before a race. The arrangement of the riders and saddles suggests a moment of calm before movement, with an atmosphere imbued with expectation. From a technical point of view, Degas achieves a remarkable balance between the spontaneity of the impressionist brushstroke and the rigor of academic drawing. Perspective is crucial in this composition, with diagonal lines guiding the viewer's gaze through the landscape. Light, an essential element in Impressionist painting, filters softly between the figures, highlighting the musculature of the horses and the relaxed posture of the riders. Unlike other Impressionists who favored diffuse lighting effects, Degas maintained a firm line in the representation of the animals, which reinforces their presence in the scene. Within Degas' artistic repertoire, this work is part of a series of studies on the world of horse racing, a subject that he explored with great dedication. His equestrian paintings combine meticulous observation with an artistic sensitivity that distinguishes him from other painters of the time. The impact of these works on the history of art is undeniable, as they opened new avenues for the representation of movement and the interaction between figures in an open space. An interesting detail is that Degas was not fond of horse racing per se, but of the aesthetics of the equestrian show. His focus was on the anatomy and behavior of the animals, rather than on the excitement of the event. In this sense, his gaze was almost scientific, like that of a meticulous observer who sought to capture the essence of movement without distorting it with the drama of traditional academic painting. Number 23. Dancers Practicing at the Bar, 1877. By the end of the 19th century, Edgar Degas had established his position as one of the most innovative painters of the Impressionist movement, although he himself rejected this classification. Dancers Practicing at the Bar, 1877, is one of his most iconic works, masterfully capturing the rigorous discipline and private world of ballet, a recurring theme in his work. At a time when academic painting predominated with grandiose and mythological representations, Degas turned his gaze to the everyday, transforming seemingly simple moments into scenes full of life and emotion. His obsession with movement and anatomy led him to closely study the dancers of the Paris Opera, a universe of beauty and demand that he immortalized in multiple works. The composition of this painting is a reflection of his technical mastery. Degas uses an unusual perspective, with a slightly elevated angle that immerses the viewer in the dance studio. The distribution of the figures is asymmetrical, creating a natural dynamism, while the dancers' postures show a mix of concentration and exhaustion. Light plays a fundamental role, highlighting the shapes of the bodies and the delicate tutu of the dancers, while warm, earthy tones reinforce the intimate atmosphere. Degas experimented with the pastel technique in this work, a choice that allowed him to more fluidly capture the texture of the dresses and the softness of the environment. Beyond its technical virtuosity, dancers practicing at the bar is a window into the reality of ballet in the 19th century. Degas does not idealize his models, but rather depicts them with an almost documentary precision, showing the hardship of training and the tension in their muscles. Unlike traditional portraits of dancers on stage, here the artist invites us to observe the effort behind the performance. This humanizing perspective marked a before and after in the representation of dance in the history of art. Interestingly, Degas was known for his reserved nature and fascination with the close observation of movement. His interest in ballet did not arise from a love of dance, but from an obsession with anatomy and the body in action. In his old age, his vision deteriorated considerably, leading him to focus even more on pastel and sculpture, always seeking to capture the essence of movement with the same intensity as in this work. Number 22. Ballet dancers. From 1884 to 1885. During the second half of the 19th century, Edgar Degas established himself as the quintessential painter of dance. Ballet Dancers, 1884 to 1885, is a work that encapsulates his profound study of movement and his unmistakable impressionist style, in which color and composition take on essential importance. Unlike other artists of his time, who focused on large historical or mythological scenes, Degas found in ballet rehearsals an unprecedented field of artistic exploration. During this period, his technique underwent a notable evolution, leaving aside academic detail to delve into a freer and more atmospheric brushstroke. In this painting, Degas shows a group of dancers rehearsing with a gestural ease that highlights the spontaneity of the moment. The composition, marked by diagonals and dynamic lines, conveys a sense of continuous movement, as if the dance did not stop even within the frame of the work. Its vibrant colors, with a predominance of blue and orange tones, create a visual contrast that accentuates the diffuse light of the environment. Using pastels on paper, Degas achieves an almost ethereal texture, in which the contours blur and the figures seem to merge with the space. This effect not only accentuates the feeling of transience, but also reinforces the idea that painting captures an ephemeral moment of reality. The most remarkable thing about this work is its ability to convey the essence of ballet without resorting to idealization. Degas moves away from the grandeur of the stage and takes us to a more intimate environment, where the dancers are not perfect figures, but real bodies subjected to the rigor of rehearsal. This almost documentary approach was revolutionary in its time, since dance was usually portrayed from a more glamorous and less realistic perspective. His obsession with the faithful representation of movement led him to study photography and sculpture, disciplines that influenced his way of constructing the space and postures of his models. Degas' work at this stage of his career marked a turning point in modern art. His studies of the figure in motion influenced later generations of artists, from the Expressionists to the abstract. Despite his misanthropic character and tendency toward isolation, his legacy lives on in the representation of the human body in dance, where technical precision and emotion are intertwined in an unparalleled way. Number 21. The Orchestra at the Opera. From 1868 to 1869. In the 19th century, The Opera House was the epicenter of cultural life in Paris, a space where music, dance, and high society met in spectacular harmony. The Orchestra at the Opera, 1868 to 1869, is a work that challenges the pictorial conventions of the time by offering an unusual perspective. Instead of focusing on the dancers or the stage, Edgar Degas introduces us to the orchestra pit, giving us a point of view that was rarely shown in traditional painting. This innovative approach not only highlights his compositional talent, but also reflects his interest in the fragmentation of reality, a characteristic that would become key in his artistic evolution. In this painting, Degas breaks with the visual hierarchy typical of academic art. The orchestra occupies most of the canvas, with the musicians portrayed in meticulous realism, each absorbed in their performance. Among them stands out the portrait of his friend Désiré Degas, bassoonist at the Paris Opera, which adds a personal nuance to the work. In the background, the dancers appear barely hinted at, like an ethereal presence that contrasts with the solidity of the musicians. This arrangement creates a cinematic effect, as if Degas had frozen an instant of Parisian nightlife. The lighting in the painting is subtle but effective. The light appears to come from the stage, casting a soft glow over the musicians, while the background is shrouded in a haze of color. This technique, combined with the loose brushwork and tonal variations, gives the work a vibrant and enveloping atmosphere. Although Degas had not yet fully embraced Impressionism at this time, his treatment of color and composition already pointed towards a new way of depicting modernity. With this work, Degas not only pays homage to music and dance, but also redefines the way we observe these spectacles. His fragmented gaze and use of perspective anticipate the explorations that would mark 20th century art, demonstrating that beauty does not always reside in the obvious, but in the details hidden within the movement of life itself. Number 20. Woman in the Bath, 1886. In the 19th century, Impressionist painting was established as an aesthetic revolution that challenged traditional academic principles. Edgar Degas, with his unique perspective, immersed himself in the exploration of everyday life with an almost voyeuristic approach, moving away from grand historical narratives to capture the intimacy of ephemeral moments. In this context, Woman in the Bath, 1886, emerges as a masterpiece that redefines the representation of the female body, stripping it of idealizations to immerse it in the naturalness of domestic routine. With a subdued palette and vibrant brushstrokes, Degas captures the fleeting nature of water sliding down the skin of the protagonist, a moment of vulnerability that in its time challenged the canons of artistic representation. The technique used in this work reflects Degas' obsession with experimenting with pastel, a medium that allowed him to achieve an ethereal, translucent texture. The arrangement of the figure, hunched and seen from an elevated perspective, emphasizes his study of movement and anatomy without resorting to classical rigidity. The soft, enveloping lighting accentuates the intimate character of the scene, while the contrasts between light and shadow add depth to the composition. The fragmented brushwork and the superimposition of layers of color evoke the immediacy of photography, a medium that fascinated the artist and greatly influenced his visual approach. Within Degas' oeuvre, Woman in a Bathtub is part of a series of works dedicated to the representation of female bathing, a recurring theme in his later years. Unlike the sensual vision that predominated in Western art, his women do not pose or seek the viewer's gaze, but are immersed in their own actions, indifferent to the presence of the observer. This approach earned him both admiration and criticism, as some contemporaries considered his approach to be bordering on the invasive, while others celebrated his bold representation of everyday life. This work, along with others from the same series, was exhibited in the 19th century, sparking a profound reflection on the relationship between art and voyeurism. Its seemingly spontaneous composition hides a meticulous study of balance and form, reflecting Degas' tireless quest to capture the essence of human movement. It is said that the artist observed his models without them noticing, studying each gesture with an almost scientific thoroughness. Number 19. The Weight, 1882. In the 19th century, the transformation of urban life in Paris marked a radical change in the way artists conceived their subjects. Edgar Degas, one of the greatest exponents of Impressionism, moved away from traditional representations to focus on scenes that captured the essence of modernity. The Weight, 1882, is one of his most evocative works, where drama and psychological tension prevail over mere visual representation. In this piece, the artist explores the state of anxiety and uncertainty through the body language of his protagonists, who seem trapped in an endless pause, immersed in their thoughts. Degas deploys a palette of muted tones and brushstrokes that suggest latent movement. The arrangement of the characters in the composition guides the viewer's gaze toward the emptiness of the scene, an absence that amplifies the feeling of unease. The rigid posture of one of the figures, in contrast to the slight inclination of the other, creates a dynamic of tension that reinforces the feeling of anticipation. The subtle lighting and enveloping shadows accentuate the introspection of the protagonists, giving them a psychological dimension that goes beyond mere appearance. Throughout his career, Degas demonstrated a particular interest in capturing moments of transition, instances in which the action seems suspended in time. The Weight is a paradigmatic example of this obsession, as no obvious event occurs in it, but the emotional charge suggests an untold story. This narrative approach, based on insinuation rather than direct exposition, sets him apart from his Impressionist contemporaries, who sought to capture the immediacy of light and color with greater spontaneity. Some interpretations of this work suggest that Degas was inspired by scenes of everyday Parisian life, where women often waited for news from their loved ones or moved from one destination to another with resignation. The way in which the artist managed to capture the psychology of his subjects is one of the elements that consolidated his legacy, as his paintings not only show bodies in motion, but also souls trapped in moments of uncertainty. It is said that Degas, obsessed with the perfection of gestures, secretly observed people in cafes and stations, absorbing every nuance of their emotions. Number 18. The Essay, from 1873 to 1878. In the 19th century, dance became a recurring theme in the work of Edgar Degas, who found in ballet an inexhaustible source of inspiration. The Rehearsal, from 1873 to 1878, is one of his most representative paintings, where the movement, discipline, and tension of the ballet world are captured with a unique sensitivity. Unlike his contemporaries, who focused on the grandeur of stage performances, Degas chose to portray the preparation, the moments before perfection, when effort and fatigue become evident. The composition of the work is marked by the asymmetrical arrangement of the characters, a recurring characteristic of the artist's style. The dancers appear dispersed, some concentrating on their movements, others in a relaxed attitude, generating a visual rhythm that evokes the fluidity of dance. The dim lighting and diffuse atmosphere provide a sense of realism that transports the viewer into the rehearsal room. Degas combines oil and pastel techniques to achieve a texture that captures the lightness of the tutus and the solidity of the wooden floor, elements that contrast with each other and reinforce the three-dimensionality of the scene. Within the artist's career, this work represents a turning point in his exploration of ballet, as it was during these years that he consolidated his interest in the study of the body and movement. His dancers are not idealized representations, but human figures subjected to rigorous training, where art and sacrifice are intertwined. The choice to capture moments of preparation instead of moments of scenic glory shows his fascination with discipline, a reflection of his own perfectionism as a painter. Degas is said to have frequented rehearsals at the Paris Opera, where he would watch the dancers for hours, making quick sketches before putting his impressions on canvas. His meticulous study of anatomy and movement allowed him to create scenes that, despite their apparent spontaneity, were carefully composed. This work, as well as being a testament to the artist's talent, offers an intimate glimpse of the sacrifice behind the beauty, a reminder that grace on stage is the result of countless hours of effort. Number 17. Before the Race. From 1882 to 1888. The painting, Before the Race, is a reflection of Edgar Degas' deep interest in the equestrian world, a recurring theme in his artistic production. Painted between 1882 and 1888 AD, this scene captures a moment of tense anticipation before a horse competition, depicting the riders and their mounts in full concentration. In the context of the 19th century, horse racing had become a highly prestigious spectacle within French high society, and Degas, with his innate ability to observe, was able to capture the energy and expectation of these events with a unique perspective. The technique used in this work is emblematic of Degas' style. His loose brushwork and masterful use of color and light allow for a sense of dynamism that contrasts with the apparent stillness of the scene. The artist employs an asymmetrical composition that reinforces the spontaneity of the moment, making viewers feel as if they are witnessing the scene in real time. The precision with which he depicts the horse's musculature and the posture of the riders demonstrates his deep study of movement, something he also applied to his famous depictions of dancers. Within Degas' career, this work is of particular importance because it shows his interest in exploring new forms of visual representation, moving away from academic rigidity and approaching the freshness of Impressionism. However, unlike many of his contemporaries, he preferred to work in his studio from sketches and previous studies, which allowed him to achieve extraordinary meticulousness without losing the vitality of the moment. This technical choice reinforces his position as an innovator within 19th century art, a period marked by the rise of modernism and artistic experimentation. As with many of his works, Before the Race is not just a static image, but a visual narrative that hints at the drama and excitement of the competition. The viewer does not simply observe the horses and riders at rest, but can imagine the burst of energy that is about to occur. This capacity for suggestion is one of Degas' most notable legacies. As with his agile brushstrokes and mastery of composition, he managed to capture the essence of movement without needing to depict the action at its climax. Number 16. Two Dancers on the Stage. 1874. The work, Two Dancers on the Stage, made in the year 1874 AD, is one of the most representative pieces of Edgar Degas' artistic legacy. His fascination with dance led him to tirelessly explore the universe of ballet, and this painting is a testament to his ability to capture not only the grace of movement, but also the intimacy and concentration of his models. In the context of the 19th century, ballet was a symbol of elegance and sophistication in Parisian society, but it was also an arduous discipline that demanded extreme dedication from the dancers. Degas not only shows the beauty of dance, but also the effort and discipline behind each performance. Technically, this work is a masterful example of the use of color and light to convey atmosphere. Degas uses warm, vibrant tones to highlight the figures of the dancers against the darker background of the stage, creating a contrasting effect that emphasizes three-dimensionality. His quick, loose brushstrokes lend a sense of movement to the scene, making the viewer perceive the subtlety of the dancer's movement and the immediacy of the moment. The chosen perspective, slightly from above, immerses us in the action as if we were observing the scene from behind the scenes, an innovative approach that breaks with the traditional representation of dance in painting. This work is a key point in Degas' career because it marks his consolidation as the painter of dance par excellence. His obsession with capturing the gestures, poses, and psychology of dancers led him to produce hundreds of studies on the subject, making him an absolute reference within Impressionism. However, Degas differed from other Impressionists in his interest in precise drawing and rigorous compositional structure, which gave him an unmistakable style. Two Dancers on the Stage is not only a work of great visual beauty, but also a detailed study of human movement, revealing the artist's meticulous observation. Beyond aesthetics, the painting offers us a glimpse into the intimacy of ballet, showing us the dancers in a moment of concentration before their performance. This close, almost documentary approach was one of Degas' great innovations, who with his keen perception knew how to transform the everyday into art. Through this work, he not only immortalized the splendor of ballet, but also allowed the viewer to feel the expectation and dedication of those young women who, with tireless discipline, sought to achieve perfection in every step. Number 15. Dancer Tying Her Shoe. From 1880 to 1885. The painting, Dancer Tying Her Shoe, painted between 1880 and 1885 AD, is one of Edgar Degas' most intimate and captivating depictions of the world of ballet. Unlike other works where he portrays the splendor of the stage, here he transports us to a moment of private preparation when the dancer adjusts her costume before going on stage. This seemingly simple moment contains a great emotional and visual charge, as it captures the concentration and daily routine of dancers in the 19th century, a time when the discipline of ballet was extremely demanding and only the most dedicated managed to achieve recognition in the theaters of Paris. From an artistic perspective, this work is a clear example of Degas' mastery of human anatomy and the depiction of movement. The dancer's pose, leaning slightly forward while holding her shoelace, conveys a sense of balance and naturalness. The use of color, with soft pastel tones, and the loose brushstrokes confer an atmosphere of calm and contemplation. The out-of-focus background, typical of many of his works, reinforces the idea that the viewer is observing a fleeting moment, almost as if it were a scene seen in passing. Within Degas' artistic evolution, this work demonstrates his interest in everyday gestures and the expressiveness of bodies at rest. While other Impressionists focused on landscapes or outdoor scenes, he found in ballet studios an inexhaustible source of inspiration. His particular approach, based on unusual angles and close framing, revealed a more human and personal aspect of ballet, moving it away from the grandiloquent spectacle and closer to the reality of the physical effort and dedication of the dancers. This painting, in particular, shows us a facet of dance that was rarely represented at the time, giving it documentary as well as artistic value. Degas, with his unmistakable style, transformed seemingly mundane scenes into works of great depth and meaning. Ballerina Tying Her Shoe is not only a visual testimony of life during ballet rehearsals, but also reflects the meticulousness with which the artist observed and captured every movement. Through this work, Degas invites us to look beyond the stage and appreciate the beauty hidden in the moments before the magic of the show. Number 14. Dancers in Blue, 1890. At the end of the 19th century, a fascination with classical dance became one of the most distinctive hallmarks of Edgar Degas, who, through his brushes, captured the essence of movement, light, and the atmosphere of ballet rehearsals and performances. Dancers in Blue, is one of his most representative works, where the combination of cold tones and dynamic brushstrokes frames the elegance and discipline of the dancers. The French painter knew how to endow his scene with a palpable intimacy, showing the young women in full preparation, far from the romantic idealization that usually predominated in academic painting of the time. His close and detailed approach transforms the act of dressing and adjusting the tutus into a moment of art in itself, captured with almost photographic precision. The technique used in this work is a masterful combination of oil and pastel on paper attached to canvas, a resource that Degas frequently used to give a velvety texture to the skin of his models and a vivid light to the fabrics. The composition breaks with traditional symmetry, placing the dancers in different poses and angles that transmit a sensation of continuous movement. The short and vibrant brushstrokes, influenced by Impressionism, manage to capture the transience of light on the bodies and clothing, while the superimposition of layers of color generates an unparalleled three-dimensional sensation. In the context of Degas' career, this work reflects his evolution towards a greater abstraction of movement, moving away from the rigorous academicism of his early training. Despite his association with Impressionism, his approach remained closer to meticulous observation than pure spontaneity. Dancers in Blue is a clear manifestation of his obsession with gesture, tensed muscles, and the discipline underlying the apparent grace of dance. The partial lighting and abrupt cuts of the scene evoke the use of photographic framing, revealing his fascination with the new visual technologies of the time. This work has been widely studied due to the way in which Degas managed to capture the routine and fatigue of the dancers, rather than just exalting their scenic beauty. The artist did not limit himself to the idealized representation of ballet, but explored the dedication and effort behind each performance. In many of his paintings, including this one, the focus is on the bodies in full action, leaving the faces in the background, as if they were mere instruments of his art. The ability to transform an everyday scene into a masterpiece is, without a doubt, one of Degas' great legacies. Number 13. In the Hat Shop, 1882. During the 19th century, Paris became the epicenter of fashion and elegance, where hat shops were authentic temples of refinement. In this context, Edgar Degas created In the Hat Shop, a work that moves away from his iconic depiction of ballet to explore the world of bourgeois women in their interaction with the fashion industry. This painting is a window into everyday Parisian life, where customers immerse themselves in the choice of accessories that define their social status. The scene takes place in an environment illuminated by natural light that filters through the shop, enhancing the variety of textures and colors of the hats on display. Degas manages to capture the essence of luxury commerce with an unusual and bold composition. The tilted perspective and the arrangement of the elements generate a feeling of spontaneity and dynamism, as if the viewer were entering into a real shopping moment. The rapid, overlapping brushstrokes reflect the Impressionist influence on his technique, but also his obsession with close observation. Unlike other artists of his time, Degas does not seek to exalt the female figure from a romantic ideal, but rather portrays it in action, with natural gestures and relaxed postures that reveal a sense of immediacy. In Degas' career, this work represents his interest in the role of women in modern society and their relationship with consumption. While other Impressionist painters focused on scenes of cafes or gardens, he turned his attention to the enclosed spaces where women interacted with the commercial world. The hat shop is not just a place of purchase, but a microcosm that reflects the aspirations, taste, and identity of the Parisian clientele. This sociological and artistic approach gives a special depth to his work. One of the most intriguing aspects of this painting is the way Degas balances detail with ethereal atmosphere. The women's faces are barely sketched, but their gestures and postures are eloquent enough to convey the shopping experience. The combination of blurred lines and vibrant colors gives the scene a sense of constant movement, as if the activity inside the store never stops. This ability to capture the ephemeral with a firm, confident brushstroke established Degas as one of the keenest observers of his time. Number 12. Miss Lala at the Fernando Circus. 1879. Circus performance in the 19th century represented one of the most vibrant and surprising forms of entertainment in Europe. Within this context, Edgar Degas captured an exceptional moment in Miss Lala at the Circus Fernando, a painting that departs from his usual themes to explore the skill, risk, and theatricality of the circus. The protagonist of the work, the acrobat known as Miss Lala, is portrayed in the act, suspended in the air by her teeth, in a display of strength and precision. Degas, with his meticulous eye, not only immortalizes her feat, but also manages to convey the tension and wonder of the spectacle. The perspective chosen by Degas is unconventional and risky, presenting the acrobat from a low angle, which reinforces the feeling of height and danger. The fragmented composition and the use of warm and dark colors contribute to the theatrical atmosphere of the scene. Although Degas was known for his obsession with ballet, in this work he demonstrates his ability to capture the energy and drama of a different performing art. Through diffuse brushstrokes and dim lighting, he accentuates the contrast between the light of the stage and the darkness of the circus. Within his oeuvre, this painting marks a deeper exploration into the study of movement and anatomy in tension. While many of his works on dancers show the grace of the body at rest or in rehearsal, here the artist faces a greater challenge, to represent extreme physical resistance. The work is a clear example of his inclination towards expressive realism, a trait that distinguishes him within Impressionism. It is remarkable how Degas manages to convey the sense of anticipation surrounding Miss Lala's performance. The arrangement of the elements in the painting guides the viewer's gaze directly towards the acrobat, emphasizing her stylized figure in contrast to the surrounding darkness. The combination of technique, framing, and drama make this work one of the most unique in his career, a reminder that art and risk sometimes go hand in hand. Number 11. Ballet rehearsal on the stage. 1874. In the 19th century, Paris was consolidating its position as the epicenter of art and culture in Europe. In this context, Edgar Degas explored the daily life of the city with an innovative approach, capturing fleeting moments with unprecedented dynamism. Ballet rehearsal on stage is one of his most emblematic works, where the artist transcends mere representation to delve into the psychology of his characters. The young dancers, dressed in light tutus, seem absorbed in their training, absorbed in a world where grace and discipline converge in every movement. The mastery of color and composition allows the viewer to feel the vibrant atmosphere of the rehearsal, almost as if they were present on the scene. Degas, a master of pastel, achieves a texture that suggests the immediacy of the moment. The artificial light bathes the scene in a soft warmth, casting shadows that reinforce the three-dimensionality of the figures. The oblique perspective and asymmetrical arrangement of the bodies reveal his fascination with Japanese art, an influence that would mark many of his later works. His loose, energetic strokes give the composition an air of spontaneity, but each element has been carefully studied. The master of Impressionist realism, however, moves away from idealism to show the reality of hard work and physical demands behind elegance. Degas' obsession with the world of ballet was not merely aesthetic, it was driven by a deep concern for the human condition. Unlike his Impressionist contemporaries, who sought to capture exterior light, he preferred interiors, where he could analyze gestures and emotions with almost scientific precision. The inclusion of the dance master and the posture of the young women, some exhausted, others focused, confirm his interest in bodily expression as a vehicle for visual narrative. This is not an idyllic portrait of ballet, but a candid look at the routine of its protagonists, who embody both effort and beauty. Far from being a simple ballet scene, this work represents the culmination of Degas' technical and conceptual exploration. Here, the artist not only experiments with light and perspective, but also challenges the pictorial conventions of his time. It is a testament to his ability to transform the everyday into a spectacle of restrained emotion. In his later years, he would remain obsessed with movement and human anatomy, leaving a legacy that profoundly influenced modern art. Number 10. Interior, The Rape, from 1868 to 1869. During the second half of the 19th century, Edgar Degas challenged established norms with a work that was disturbing and charged with psychological tension. Interior, The Rape, breaks with the serenity and grace of his ballet scenes to enter a space of conflict and contain drama. The painting presents a closed room, dramatically illuminated by a dim light that accentuates the feeling of claustrophobia. In the center, a woman sits on the edge of the bed, seems to shrink into herself, while a man in the shadows observes her with a rigid and imposing posture. There is no explicit action, but the tension is palpable in every element of the composition. Degas, known for his precision in depicting the human figure, plays here with the psychology of space. The distance between the characters and the fragmented lighting reinforce the feeling of imminent danger. The atmosphere is permeated with a strange stillness, as if the scene were unfolding in a moment of suspension before an inevitable outcome. The elongated shadows and the arrangement of the furniture not only reinforce the realism of the scene, but also contribute to its symbolic charge. Unlike the Impressionists, who sought light and color in nature, Degas opts for an introspective realism, where emotion is conveyed through composition and lighting. This work is an exception in the artist's output, who rarely explored themes of violence or such direct psychological tension. However, it reflects his interest in literature and theater, especially the works of Émile Zola, which explored human emotions with rawness. The painting, far from offering answers, leaves the viewer with more questions than certainties. What is the relationship between the characters? Is it a moment before or after a traumatic event? The title itself suggests a disturbing meaning, but the ambiguity reinforces its impact, making it one of Degas' most enigmatic works. Despite its somber character, this painting is a milestone in the artist's evolution. Its mastery of chiaroscuro and narrative composition place it within the tradition of history painting, but with a modern, cinematic approach. The way Degas constructs space and the relationships between characters anticipates later developments in 20th century art, where the psychology of the scene becomes as important as the painting technique itself. Number 9. Las Plancharas. From 1884 to 1886, the 19th century witnessed a profound social transformation, where industrialization brought with it new work dynamics. Edgar Degas, always attentive to everyday life, dedicated several of his works to the representation of women's work, moving away from the luxury and elegance of high society. The Ironers is an eloquent example of his interest in physical effort and the monotony of manual labor. In this painting, two women appear absorbed in the repetitive task of ironing clothes, with bent bodies and faces marked by fatigue. Degas does not seek to idealize their condition, but to honestly portray the harshness of physical effort. The composition is simple but effective. The inclination of the figures and the arrangement of the objects create a diagonal that reinforces the feeling of accumulated fatigue. The loose brushstrokes and the choice of a warm color palette suggest the stifling atmosphere of the workshop, where the heat and humidity must be unbearable. The scene is devoid of superfluous elements. Everything is at the service of the representation of exhaustion and resignation. It is a portrait of working-class life at a time when few artists were interested in these themes. On a technical level, the work shows Degas' absolute mastery in the representation of the human body in movement. The woman's hunched posture, resting her head on her arm, contrasts with the tension of her partner, still concentrating on the task. Unlike his dancers, whose figures radiate grace and lightness, here the artist emphasizes the heaviness of the flesh and the exhaustion of the muscles. This brutal realism, far from frivolous, reveals his interest in the human condition in its most authentic dimension. More than just a study of work, this painting is a statement about the dignity of effort. Without sentimentality or idealization, Degas manages to capture the grueling routine of these women with a sincerity that few artists of his time dared to show. In an era dominated by images of leisure and opulence, this work stands as a testimony to the other side of modernity, one in which fatigue is the true protagonist. Number 8. At the Races. From 1866 to 1868. During the second half of the 19th century, Paris was undergoing a period of profound change, driven by the modernization of the city and a growing interest in the dynamism of everyday life. Edgar Degas, one of the key figures of Impressionism, masterfully captured the movement and atmosphere of urban events in his work At the Races, painted between 1866 and 1868 AD. A passion for horses and racing was a feature of Parisian high society, and Degas, with his keen observation, captured not only the equestrian competition but also the life and atmosphere surrounding it. The painting offers a vibrant scene in which riders, horses, and spectators merge in a meticulously studied compositional balance, denoting the artist's fascination with photography and capturing the fleeting moment. Technically, the work is distinguished by its innovative use of framing and perspective, with elements placed at unexpected angles. Degas breaks with academic tradition by showing the subjects partially or in dynamic positions, giving the impression of movement and spontaneity. The brushwork is fluid but not diffuse, which allows the detail and structure of the subjects to be maintained without losing the sense of speed that characterizes the scene. The color palette, dominated by earthy tones and delicate nuances, balances the strength of the composition with the visual harmony characteristic of the artist. In this sense, the influence of Japanese prints, which Degas studied with great interest, is evident in the asymmetry of the image and in the arrangement of the figures. This painting is a reflection of Degas' evolution within the Impressionist movement, although the artist never considered himself an Impressionist in the pure sense of the term. Unlike his contemporaries, who preferred the outdoors and natural light as their central themes, Degas focused on structure, composition, and the depiction of form in motion. At the Races is proof of his skill in capturing dynamism without sacrificing solidity of form, which set him apart from other painters of the time. His close study of the human body, the balance of objects, and experimentation with framing were characteristics that accompanied him throughout his career. Beyond its technical aspect, the work also reveals Degas' interest in the psychology of the characters and the relationship between human beings and animals in the racing scene. It is not a simple representation of a sporting event, but an exploration of the tension, speed, and energy contained in each figure. Through a carefully calculated composition and an unconventional perspective, Degas managed to immortalize an instant of Parisian modernity, where the emotion of the spectacle and the fleeting nature of time are captured on canvas with unparalleled precision. Number 7. Place de la Concorde, 1875. In 19th century Paris, the urban transformation driven by Baron Haussmann turned the city into an ideal setting for observing human movement and social interaction. Edgar Degas, always drawn to modern life and everyday scenes, found in the Place de la Concorde a perfect motif to explore the dynamics of the city and its inhabitants. In 1875 AD, the artist painted Place de la Concorde, one of his most enigmatic and technically daring works. In this painting, Degas depicts Viscount Ludovic Napoleon Lepic, accompanied by his daughters and his dog, walking nonchalantly across the wide esplanade. What at first glance appears to be a simple urban scene becomes a masterful study of space, composition, and fragmented visual narration. One of the most striking aspects of the work is the sense of spontaneity and imbalance in the arrangement of the characters. Unlike traditional compositions, Degas leaves large empty areas on the canvas and places the protagonists in a dispersed and asymmetrical manner, challenging the pictorial conventions of the time. The figure of Viscount Lepic, slightly hunched and in the act of walking, conveys a sense of movement that contrasts with the more static posture of his daughters. The dog, located at the lower right corner, reinforces the depth and direction of the scene, while the square extends with an amplified perspective that suggests an open and limitless space. The use of color and light in Place de la Concorde is equally innovative. Unlike other Impressionists, Degas does not indulge in an excessively vibrant palette or diffuse lighting effects. Instead, he employs restrained, nuanced tones that reinforce the sense of naturalness in the scene. The projected shadows and the almost deserted atmosphere of the square contribute to the feeling of solitude and distance between the characters, a trait that has been interpreted as a reflection of the introspective nature of bourgeois society at the time. Degas, with his keen eye and interest in photographic composition, captures a moment that seems trivial but is full of meaning. The painting is a testament to his mastery of the representation of modern space and his ability to transform the everyday into an innovative work of art. Despite the apparent disconnection between the characters, the painting conveys a silent narrative that provides a glimpse of human relationships in the urban context of the 19th century. Number 6. The Tube, 1886. As the 1880s progressed, Edgar Degas intensified his exploration of the female figure in motion, a recurring theme in his work. His fascination with ballet and the world of dance led him to create a series of paintings that capture the energy, discipline, and intimacy of the ballerina's universe. The Pipe, painted in 1886, is one of his most emblematic works within this series, where the artist takes his interest in unusual perspective and fragmented composition to the extreme. In the painting, a ballerina leans over to adjust her costume, while the viewer observes the scene from an unexpected, almost voyeuristic angle. The visual structure of the tube is a reflection of Degas' experimentation with photography and Japanese prints, influences that marked his style in these years. The female figure is cut off by the edge of the canvas, with a frame that emphasizes the inclination of the body and the tension of the gesture. This compositional decision not only generates a sense of immediacy, but also challenges the conventional idea of classical representation, taking the painting towards a more modern and dynamic language. The loose and vibrant brushstrokes add texture and depth, creating a sense of constant movement. In addition to its technical audacity, the tube offers an intimate look at the world of ballerinas, a theme that Degas explored with a mix of admiration and realism. Far from idealizing his subjects, the artist depicted moments of effort, preparation, and concentration, revealing the less glamorous side of dance. The closed composition and unusual perspective accentuate the feeling of closeness, allowing the viewer to observe a private moment within the dancer's grueling routine. This work became a reference point within late Impressionism and anticipated the break with traditional painting that would mark the art of the first decades of the 20th century. The combination of visual experimentation and thematic sensitivity makes the tube a testament to Degas' genius and his ability to reinvent form in each of his creations. Number 5. The Star, 1878. In the context of the 19th century, the world of ballet was a universe of extreme discipline and ethereal beauty, a source of endless fascination for Edgar Degas. The Star, painted in 1878 AD, masterfully encapsulates the essence of spectacle, but also hints at the loneliness that lurks behind the veil of fame. In the painting, a ballerina in full performance shines under the spotlight, the absolute center of the composition. Her delicate, almost weightless pose is captured with a dynamism that conveys the tension and grace of the moment, while in the shadows in the background, a male figure watches with a haunting presence. Technically, the work displays Degas' exceptional mastery of pastel, a medium that allowed him to work quickly and layer colors with unrivaled subtlety. The velvety texture and vibrant chromatic range contribute to the sensation of movement, as if the dancer were in full rotation. The oblique composition and abrupt cut of the scene, influenced by the Japanese art that so fascinated the Impressionists, defy traditional perspective and emphasize the fleeting nature of the moment. Light, in particular, plays a crucial role. It illuminates the dancer with an almost theatrical glow, creating a contrast between her ethereal figure and the surrounding darkness. Within Degas' oeuvre, the Star represents one of his most exquisite interpretations of ballet, a theme he explored obsessively throughout his career. Beyond superficial beauty, the painting suggests a reflection on the sacrifice and vulnerability of dancers, frequently subjected to the critical gaze of patrons and spectators. This work moves away from pure Impressionism to embrace a more personal and psychological approach, revealing the artist's interest in compositional structure and the emotion contained in the gestures of the human body. In the history of art, the Star is considered one of the most evocative representations of the world of ballet. The work transcends simple aesthetic admiration and forces us to look beyond the splendor of the stage, towards the reality of the dancers who, despite their ephemeral brilliance, were figures trapped in a rigorous and often relentless existence. Degas, with his incisive gaze, leaves us with an unforgettable image of that duality between glory and solitude. Number 4. The Bellelli Family, 1858. Painted in 1858 AD, the Bellelli family is a highly ambitious work in Edgar Degas' repertoire. Unlike his iconic depictions of ballet and Parisian life, this painting is an intimate and solemn portrait, reflecting both the classical influences and the innovations that would define his style. The scene depicts the artist's aunt, Laura Bellelli, with her husband Gennaro and their daughters, Giulia and Giovanna. The arrangement of the figures, the rigidity of their postures, and the distant expression of each character suggest a silent tension that charges the composition with drama. The realism with which Degas approaches the portrait is remarkable. Every gesture, every glance, and every distance seem carefully calculated to convey a story of complex family relationships. Laura Bellelli, dressed in black, is the dominant figure in the composition, with an expression of severity and resignation that contrasts with the rigid posture of her husband, who sits in a distant, almost absent attitude. The girls, placed between them, act as a visual link, although their body language suggests that they are also trapped in this atmosphere of emotional coldness. The sober background, devoid of excessive ornamentation, reinforces the feeling of confinement and formality. Technically, Degas demonstrates in this work his mastery of compositional structure and in capturing the psychology of the characters. The influence of the great 17th century masters, such as Diego Velázquez and Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres, is evident in the precision of the details and in the use of light to model the faces and clothing. However, there is a modern approach in the way the artist fragments the scene, using unusual angles and cuts that foreshadow his future inclination towards spontaneous and dynamic composition. Within Degas' career, the Bellelli family is a fundamental piece, as it shows his transition from academic training to a more personal style. The work is not only a family portrait, but also a testimony to the tensions and hidden emotions within a 19th century bourgeois family. With a critical eye and impeccable technical mastery, the artist constructs a scene where emotional distance weighs as much as the presence of each character, making it one of the most intriguing and penetrating representations of his career. Number 3. Absinthe, 1876. In the bohemian atmosphere of the 19th century, where Parisian cafes became the scene of encounters and disagreements, Edgar Degas created in 1876 AD one of his most emblematic and provocative works, La Absinthe. The painting depicts a couple in apparent desolation, sitting at a cafe table, each immersed in their own world. The woman, with a lost gaze and a pale face, seems to be immersed in a deep melancholy, while the man, with an air of resignation, directs his gaze towards an indeterminate point. On the table rests a glass of absinthe, the drink that at that time was a symbol of both inspiration and decadence. The composition is notable for its bold spatial arrangement and use of perspective to create a sense of isolation. The distance between the figures, despite sharing the same table, reinforces the idea of lack of communication. Degas employs asymmetrical framing and abrupt cutting at the edges, techniques inspired by photography and Japanese art, which give the scene a spontaneous and fragmented character. The muted, earthy color palette intensifies the mood of gloom, while the play of light and shadow adds subtle but penetrating drama. Beyond its aesthetic value, La Absinthe is a work of great social and psychological significance. In an era when the modernization of Paris was radically transforming urban life, Degas captures a moment of introspection that reveals the less glamorous side of the city. The painting was the subject of controversy for its crude and unidealized representation of loneliness and boredom, which led some critics of the time to describe it as immoral. However, far from being a simple denunciation, the work offers an uncompromising look at the reality of certain sectors of Parisian society. In the history of art, absinthe stands as a testament to the emotional complexity of human beings. Degas, with his observant approach and technical mastery, manages to convey a moment of life with unparalleled intensity. The painting continues to spark interpretations and debates, confirming its status as one of the most striking and timeless images in modern art. Number 2. The Little Dancer of 14, 1881. In the 19th century, when sculpture was still dominated by heroic and academic models, Edgar Degas broke all conventions with The Little Dancer, aged 14. This three-dimensional work is one of the most innovative pieces of modern art and marked a turning point in the perception of sculpture as an expressive medium. The figure represents a young dancer from the Paris Opera, Marie van Gotham, who served as a model for the artist. At a time when ballerinas were seen both as promising artists and as part of the most vulnerable working class, Degas presented a realistic vision, devoid of idealization and focused on the harshness of the discipline. On a technical level, the sculpture is radically different from its contemporaries. Instead of polished marble or a uniform bronze, Degas used polychrome wax to give it a striking realism. In addition, he incorporated authentic textile elements, such as a fabric tutu and a hair ribbon, blurring the boundaries between sculpture and installation. Her posture, with her chin slightly raised and her chest thrust forward, conveys a mixture of pride and fragility, suggesting the ambivalence of youth caught up in the demanding discipline of ballet. The work was initially met with mixed reactions. Some praised it as a bold depiction of reality, while others considered it almost grotesque due to its unusually truthful character. For Degas, this piece represented the culmination of his interest in movement and the human form in action. Although he was best known for his painting, sculpture allowed him to explore new dimensions of his fascination with dance. The artist's obsession with capturing reality without filters led him to create a work that, despite its modest size, makes an enormous emotional impression on the viewer. It is not just a dancer at rest, but a frozen image of youth, ambition, and sacrifice, where every detail, from the folds of her skirt to the expression on her face, reveals a deeper story. In an interesting anecdote, after Degas' death, the original wax sculpture was cast in bronze in several editions, allowing its impact to transcend the initial material limitations. However, the wax version remains the most valuable, not only for its rarity, but for the fact that it encapsulates the artist's purest vision of humanity and dance. Number 1. The Dance Class, 1874. In the context of the 19th century, when Paris was consolidating itself as the cultural epicenter of Europe, Edgar Degas created the dance class, one of his most emblematic works within Impressionism. The scene captures a ballet rehearsal at the Paris Opera, a place that the artist frequented obsessively in search of inspiration. At this time, dance was considered a refined art form, but also a space of sacrifice and extreme demands for young dancers, who were rigorously supervised by ballet masters. Degas, with his characteristic style of meticulous observer, manages to capture this environment with a naturalness that challenges the traditional academic pose. Technically, the work presents a carefully balanced composition, with a point of view that seems to capture the scene as if the viewer were in a corner of the room, almost like a casual witness. The natural light that filters in from an invisible source illuminates the figures softly, highlighting the contrast between the white tutus and the dark wooden floors. Degas does not seek to idealize the dance, but to show it crudely. Some dancers are in full performance, while others appear relaxed, adjusting their clothing or even scratching their necks with a gesture of weariness. The loose and vibrant brushwork, so characteristic of Impressionism, blends with his interest in precise drawing, lending a subtle realism to each gesture. Within Degas' career, the dance class represents a synthesis of his thematic and technical explorations. Throughout his career, the artist moved away from the typical outdoor scenes of his Impressionist contemporaries and devoted himself to the observation of enclosed spaces, especially those that revealed the daily lives of working women. This painting is a testament to his fascination with dance, an obsession that led him to create multiple variations on the same theme, each with a different approach. His ability to capture movement and spontaneity in a seemingly mundane moment influenced later generations of artists, who found in his work a new way of approaching the representation of the human body in action. One of the most interesting details of the work is the presence of ballet master Jules Perret, whose authoritarian stance and watchful eye serve as the visual axis of the composition. Despite its apparent simplicity, the painting hides multiple layers of meaning, from the tension implicit in the scene to the way Degas plays with the distribution of space to suggest depth. Its genius lies in the way it transforms an everyday rehearsal into an immortal piece of Western art. Thank you for watching our video. Subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Give it a like, comment your thoughts, and share this video with your friends and family.